Good evening and welcome to Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Amanda Bowen. If you need your latest forecast outside of our show, you can give our forecast line a call anytime at 1-800-472-0391. You can also find the latest forecast for your area on the website at weather.gov/Alaska. You'll also find your latest watches, warnings, and advisories issued for your area on that website as well. And you can personalize it by adding your local office at weather.gov/Fairbanks, Anchorage, or Juneau. Taking a look at the hazardous weather that we are expecting in the next 24 to 48 hours, we're looking at a winter storm watch in effect for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast from late Tuesday night into Wednesday afternoon. That's going to be for possible blizzard conditions with wind gusts up to 45 miles per hour and heavy snow. It's going to create a lot of drifting snow as well as significant reductions to visibility down to a quarter of a mile visibility. So if you have plans to be in the eastern Beaufort Sea coast area, please heed that warning and prepare for possible blizzard conditions late Tuesday night into Wednesday. We also have a dense fog advisory that's going to be in effect from 6 p.m. this evening through noon on Tuesday for the Fairbanks area. We're expecting fog to develop this evening and through tonight and into Wednesday morning with visibilities down to a quarter of a mile or less. So definitely impacting the travel in the Fairbanks area with that dense fog tonight and tomorrow morning. Taking a look at our latest satellite imagery, we can see quite a lot of clouds over the eastern interior. That's going to be with a low pressure system that's bringing some very light precipitation into the area. Those clouds also spreading into the northern panhandle. We see another system with a front spread across the Gulf and a system over the western Aleutians, but not a lot of very high impact things to point out on the satellite imagery today. Looking at today's weather, a lot of this precipitation that we're seeing right now is going to be light. We've got low pressure centered right over the eastern interior near the Canadian border on the Yukon River, with light rain happening on the south side of that low pressure system and some light snow on the north side. High pressure in place over the Chukchi Sea coast, so that area is going to stay dry but cold. And we also have high pressure in the very far right portion of our graphic today off the Washington coast, actually high pressure, and that's still bringing some drier air into especially the southern panhandle. Low pressure just off our screen to the south of the Aleutians, bringing some rain showers into the Aleutians today as well. For tonight, low pressure still over the interior, over the central interior, that is, with high pressure still over the North Slope area. That's what's going to be bringing colder air into the North Slope, with again some light rain along the southern half of the mainland, as well as the panhandle, some rain tonight. Also rain with a trough over the Aleutians for tonight. Looking into Tuesday, we have that low pressure over the interior is going to be moving off to the east, so the focus for any precipitation is going to start shifting to the east on Tuesday. And we'll see some rain along the Gulf Coast and into the Panhandle, as well as that trough still sitting out over the western Aleutians. Rain associated with that as well. High pressure still in command over the North Slope area, with cold air making it even further south into Tuesday. For Wednesday, low pressure that was over the interior will have moved into Western Canada. So we're mostly going to be seeing a showery pattern for the southern quarter of the mainland as well as the panhandle. Also some showers into the Aleutians. High pressure very much dominating over the northern parts of the state, with snow happening along the Beaufort Sea coast. Like we talked about, we'll have that winter storm watch in effect for Tuesday night into Wednesday for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. Taking a look at temperatures for Tuesday morning, mostly 30s to around 40 degrees on Tuesday morning for a good portion of the state, but we'll see an air mass change across the northern side of the Brooks Range with cold temperatures along the north slope, with low temperatures Tuesday morning around 0 and into the negative single degrees. For Tuesday afternoon, warm temperatures for the Panhandle with temperatures in the upper 50s to even lower 60s, so a little bit warmer than usual for this time of year. Into the Gulf Coast area, we'll see temperatures in the mid to upper 40s, also low to mid 40s north of the Alaska Range into the Yukon Flats. And then again, we see quite a change in our air mass with colder air on the north side of the Brooks Range with that high pressure in command. So temperatures in the single digits to low teens on the positive side on Tuesday afternoon for the north slope. For Wednesday morning, pretty similar for the southern quarter of the state along the Gulf Coast, lows in the 40s and upper 30s, but we start to see that cold air moving further southward, so making it south of the Brooks Range on Wednesday morning with low temperatures in the teens all the way down to almost the Yukon Flats. For Wednesday afternoon, looking at temperatures a little bit cooler than Tuesday across the board, especially in the Panhandle where we'll see temperatures just in the mid 40s to maybe around 50 degrees, so a good 10 degrees cooler than we saw on Tuesday. Still mid 40s to around 50 for South Central, 40s for the YK Delta, and a little bit warmer along the north slope.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to aviation weather. Taking a look at flying weather for Tuesday morning. IFR conditions expected through most of the Bering Sea, the Aleutians, and much of the Alaska Peninsula, as well as the Kuskokwim Delta and up the Kuskokwim River into the Alaska Range. Also IFR conditions for much of the northern Gulf Coast and the entirety of the Panhandle for Tuesday morning. Tuesday afternoon, some improvement, especially along the western side of the Alaska Peninsula and up to the Kuskokwim Delta. That's improving to marginal conditions there. Still IFR conditions for the Aleutians, as well as the northern Gulf Coast through the Kenai Peninsula and southeast to the Panhandle. Marginal conditions along the north slope with some VFR conditions across the Brooks Range on Tuesday afternoon. For Wednesday morning, IFR conditions returning to the Aleutians up through the Alaska Peninsula and the Kuskokwim Delta, as well as the Alaska Range and Kenai Peninsula. Also IFR conditions for the Panhandle for Wednesday morning. Marginal conditions on the north side of the Brooks Range to the immediate north slope, as well as the Seward Peninsula south through the Yukon Delta. For Wednesday afternoon, we'll see some improvement to marginal conditions again along the Alaska Range and stretching southwestward to the Alaska Peninsula and the Yukon Delta. IFR conditions, though, still hanging around for the Aleutians as well as the North Gulf Coast and immediate Panhandle coast. IFR conditions developing Wednesday afternoon for the central North Slope area. Pass conditions on Tuesday, and AKwx Pass is expected to be marginal with some VFR along the north entrance of AKwx Pass on Monday. Adigan Pass marginal on Tuesday. Lake Clark and Merrill Passes both IFR for Tuesday, as well as Rainy Pass IFR. Windy Pass also IFR on Tuesday. Isabel Pass marginal conditions on Tuesday, as well as Mentasta Pass marginal on Tuesday. Tanita Pass marginal, but deteriorating to IFR Tuesday afternoon. And Portage Pass IFR with some MVFR along the west entrance, particularly during the morning hours. Chilkoot and White Passes both IFR on Tuesday. Taking a look at our freezing level, not quite as messy of a situation as we've been seeing the last few days, but we still have that cold air at the surface with the warm air over top of it. So 2,000 foot freezing level stretching from the Bering Sea across the YK Delta and up through the Alaska Range to the Canadian border, with 4,000 feet across the southern portion of the Panhandle. Icing for Tuesday, we'll see two areas of considerable moderate icing, both above 7,000 feet for the northern Gulf Coast and into south central, as well as the eastern Alaska Peninsula, and also considerable moderate above 7,000 feet for much of the coastal portions of the Alaska Panhandle. A few other areas of isolated moderate for Tuesday above 3,000 feet for the western Aleutians, as well as the YK Delta area, and above 3,000 feet isolated moderate for the eastern Brooks Range and the North Slope coast. Jet stream winds on Tuesday, 2 main jets to look at. We've got one that's coming out of the north, just south of the western Aleutians. So that's going to be 90 knots out of the north, as well as about 95 knots out of the west over western Canada. 9,000 foot winds, we've got those wind maximum still in that same place as we saw with the jet stream over the southern portions of the western Aleutians. So 45 to 60 knots out of the north, just south of the western Aleutians. And other than that, fairly light winds at 9,000 feet, 35 knots out of the east for much of the rest of the Aleutians, and about 30 knots out of the south for the southern panhandle. At 3,000 feet, we'll see those same stronger winds or strongest winds just south of the western Aleutians, about 50 knots out of the north, 30 to 45 knots out of the east for the rest of the Aleutians, 30 to 40 knots out of the south for the panhandle area, and a couple of other maxima around for the North Slope areas, about 30 knots out of the east and 25 knots out of the north through the Bering Strait. Turbulence for Tuesday, we've got 2 areas that we're concerned about with considerable moderate over the southern portions of the Panhandle below 5,000 feet on Tuesday and below 3,000 feet for much of the Aleutians considerable moderate. Stay tuned for more Alaska weather after this.
Here at the end of the Earth, it still feels like a place for raw exploration and adventure. It's vast in all directions and ground zero for some of the biggest questions we have about the climate. But when we decided to make a series about the frozen places on Earth, we knew there would be one hurdle we would need to jump over first. What is the cryosphere?
The what?
Ooh.
I have no idea.
While I'm aware of the cryosphere, I don't actually know what it is.
It has something to do with ice. All right, that's all I got.
How do you get people acquainted with the cryosphere when most of us don't even know what it is?
Hey, so here we are in Washington, D.C., standing on the roof of NASA headquarters. That's the Capitol building right behind me. And what headquarters does is kind of serve as the focal point to connect the dots.
That's Dr. Tom Wagner, NASA's cryospheric program scientist at headquarters. In short, Tom is responsible for making sure NASA knows what the current status of the cryosphere is.
The cryosphere is everything from the snow that falls by your house to the icy reaches of the Himalayas, to the big ice sheets of Antarctica all the way at the South Pole, and also the frozen ground of the Arctic, and even some of that frozen ground that's currently under the ocean.
If you had to break it down, you'd have a mix of sea ice, snow cover, permafrost, ice sheets, and glaciers.
Right now, our best predictions are that sea levels will rise anywhere from 1 to 3 feet within the next 100 years. 3 feet of sea level rise has the potential to displace about 100 million people, which is a lot of people that need to find new homes.
Our current reality places us at a near tipping point, and the cryosphere is playing a huge part in that delicate balance.
So one of the things people don't know about NASA is that we study the Earth, and we've been doing that since NASA's inception back in the 1950s. And we study the frozen part of the Earth in a variety of ways.
Missions like SNOWX, Airborne Snow Observatory, Oceans Melting Greenland, Operation Icebridge, Arctic Boreal Vulnerability Experiment, and countless other labs and individual researchers stand at the forefront of monitoring the cryosphere. But this year was a particularly big year.
3, 2, 1, and
liftoff of Grace Follow-On, continuing the legacy of the Grace mission of tracking the movement of water across our planet.
2 state-of-the-art satellite missions are being launched in a single year as part of a major attempt to understand Earth's frozen places. Our scientists are answering hard questions, sharing stories from the field, and giving their best predictions for what we can expect of a warming world. We're taking you with us as we follow NASA explorers on their journey to the frozen ends of the Earth as they study our rapidly changing world from satellites, planes, and boots on the ground.
What we can do really well from orbit is we can tell when a surface of land is covered in snow. What's tricky is though, how thick is that snow? And it's even trickier how much water is in that snow.
What we think of snow depends a lot on where it falls. If you live in the eastern US, maybe it's fun. Or maybe it's just a pain.
But if you live in parts of the world where they depend on the water that's in the snow for a large fraction of their total water that they use for drinking, for agriculture, for industry, or for hydropower, the snow is a very important natural resource. For example, in the western part of the United States, 80 to 90% of their renewable water comes from snow.
Snow is one part of the cryosphere that many of us have actually encountered before, but it also plays a critical role in regulating the Earth's climate. Through decades of remote sensing, NASA has kept a close eye on the ebb and flow of snow cover.
We now have a 52-year record of snow cover in the Northern Hemisphere, and we can see changes in the extent of snow cover over the time period, particularly in the last few decades, where we can see that the snow cover has been retreating. It's been melting a lot earlier in the springtime.
The extent is relatively easy to do, and it has been done over the years. What's tricky is though, how thick is that snow? And it's even trickier how much water is in that snow.
That tricky part is known as the snow water equivalent, or how much water would actually be in a layer of snow if it melted. NASA and its partners have taken to the air to help solve this elusive mystery. First, there's the Airborne Snow Observatory, or ASO, a small plane outfitted with a couple of instruments, one of which measures snow depth using LiDAR. LiDAR measures distance using light from lasers. Since 2014, ASO has flown over basins in California and Colorado, taking before and after looks at snow depth. Scientists subtract the snow-free summer data from the snow-on winter data to get an idea of the snow depth. There's no single way to measure all types of snow across the globe, and so NASA's other airborne campaign, SnowX, is testing different combinations of sensors. This winter, SnowX will test a new instrument, the Snow Water Equivalent Synthetic Aperture Radar and Radiometer, or SWISAR.
SWISAR consists of 2 main components, one of them being the radar and the second one being the radiometer.
So with the radar providing the depth of the snow and the radiometer providing the density of the snow, we could put those 2 things together and get the snow water equivalent. Here in the chamber, we're going to measure different radiation patterns at our different frequencies and do some full system testing in this chamber. This chamber kind of enables us to isolate various types of radiation and interference. And in about a month, we're going to take the instrument, mount it on a Twin Otter in the Grand Mesa in Colorado, and we're going to fly it over the Grand Mesa and take various different measurements. This is what we call our engineering flight.
Making sure the sensors are calibrated is key in order to face the challenges nature will throw at them.
Half of the area that gets covered by snow every winter contains trees and forest. And the trees make it difficult for the sensors to see the snow that's underneath the trees, so it makes it difficult for us to measure how much snow there is. After the snow's had a chance to sit on the ground for a while, it gets denser and denser and denser over time, and it changes, which is another reason why snow is very challenging to remotely sense. It doesn't stay the same, it's constantly changing. One of the things that we often do in the field is go dig what we call a snow pit. We literally dig a pit in the snow so we can see all the different layers. The layering is very important.
All this digging is part of ground truthing SNOWX, a way of matching up what the airborne instruments see and what is actually sitting on the surface. The ultimate goal of SNOWX is to figure out what the best combination of instruments would be for a future satellite mission in order to get a global picture of snow.
We need to know how much snow is in a snowpack, because if we had too much snow and the snow melts too fast, then you can get flooding. And if you don't have enough snow, or if the snow melts too early, that can lead to a longer wildfire season, a more intense drought, and we need to know these things for water resource planning.
After we had a record that was about 15, 20 years long, we started noticing that the extent of the ice in the Arctic was getting smaller over time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Talking about the marine forecast now, and starting with the ice edge. Although there hasn't been a lot of change in the ice edge over the last 24 hours, we do expect some changes over the next few days. In Bristol Bay, we'll see southerly winds, which are going to continue to push that ice north as well as deteriorate the ice along the ice edge. But points further west out into the Bering Sea are expected to experience northerly winds for the next couple of days. So although we're not expecting a lot in the way of sea ice growth, it may help push the sea ice edge just a little bit further south. Looking at our marine forecast for southeast, on Tuesday, we'll see winds generally out of the south and southeast, 15 to 20 knots over the Gulf, with seas 5 to 8 feet. Over the inside waters, winds out of the southeast at 15 to 20 knots and seas 3 to 5 feet. Looking ahead into Wednesday, winds and seas coming down just a little bit. Winds out of the southwest and west 10 to 15 knots with 15 to 20 knots over the inside waterways. Seas 3 to 4 feet over the inside waters and about 8 feet over the Gulf. For South Central on Tuesday, winds out of the east and northeast generally 15 to 20 knots almost across the board, but about 10 knots out of the northeast for Cook Inlet. Seas in the 6 to 7 foot range across the Gulf, 3 feet in Prince William Sound and 2 to 3 feet in Cook Inlet. For Wednesday, winds coming down a little bit, 10 to 15 knots across the entire Gulf, Prince William Sound, and Cook Inlet areas. Seas also coming down a little bit, 7 to 8 feet, and just 2 to 3 feet in Cook Inlet. For the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island areas on Tuesday, winds out of the east and northeast again, 10 to 20 knots, seas 7 to 8 feet on the south side of the peninsula, about 1 foot in Bristol Bay outside of that ice, and 4 feet further south on the north side of the peninsula. For Wednesday, winds increasing maybe a little bit, 10 to 20 knots still though, and seas 8 to 9 feet, so coming up just slightly on the south side of the peninsula, 2 to 4 feet on the north side of the Alaska Peninsula. For the Aleutians, winds out of the north and northeast, 25 to 30 knots for the central and eastern Aleutians, and even a little bit lower for the western Aleutians, 15 to 25 knots out of the north. Seas 10 to 12 feet on the south side of the chain and 7 to 10 feet on the north side of the chain, about 9 to 10 feet for the western Aleutians on Tuesday. For Wednesday, winds a little bit more consistent out of the north and northeast, right around 20 knots, maybe some gusts to 25, 30 knots. Seas coming down a little bit, 8 feet on the south side of the Aleutian chain and 6 to 10 feet on the north side of the Aleutian chain for Wednesday. For the west coast on Tuesday, winds generally out of the north. These are those northerly winds that we were talking about that might help push that ice edge just a little bit further south over the next couple of days. So northerly winds 20 to 25 knots. Seas right along the ice edge 2 to 3 feet, 6 to 7 feet a little bit further out into the open Bering Sea. And then on Wednesday, expect winds to come down just a little bit, 15 to 20 knots, all out of the due north. Seas coming down a little bit as well, 1 to 3 feet along the ice edge and 5 to 6 feet further west in the Bering Sea, 6 feet near the Pribilofs. For the Arctic coast on Tuesday, winds out of the west at about 20 knots for the north slope and 10 to 25 knots out of the north and northwest for the northwest coast, that 25 knots on either side of the Bering Strait. On Wednesday, we'll see an increase in winds along the north slope, 25 to 30 knots out of the west and northwest there, and 15 to 20 knots along the northwest coast, so coming down a little bit along the northwest coast on Wednesday. Recapping tonight's weather, we've got low pressure over the southern portions of the interior. That's going to be bringing some light rain to the Gulf Coast and Panhandle, with a bit of a mix of rain and snow north of that low pressure system. High pressure coming into command over the north slope, so cold with some fog for that area. And then we'll have low pressure moving into the North Gulf as well. For Tuesday, still rain for the Gulf Coast and high pressure in command over the north slope.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.